on my GeoGuessr video, I'm going to be recapping the NBA offseason so far. And I figured the way I'm gonna do this, which makes it easier for me, although I might miss some things, so apologies in advance, is I'm gonna go team by team alphabetically. I'm not gonna cover every little move they did, like a depth guy or a two-way contract guy or something like that, but just the little moves and things they did that stood out to me. And I'm recording this on the 14th of July. So if anything has happened between now and when you're seeing it, I'm sorry. I am, at this point, to the best of my knowledge, I am unable to see the future. Unfortunately, I wish I could. Okay, if we are going alphabetically, then we start with Atlanta. The Atlanta Hawks, they traded DeJounte Murray to the New Orleans Pelicans for Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, as well as a 2025 Lakers first and a 2027 first that is the worst of Milwaukee or the New Orleans pick, which overall I thought was a good trade for Atlanta, because they kind of had that. They had the whole DeJounte Murray, Trae Young experiment when they brought him in from the Spurs. To this point, it did not really work out positively for them. So overall, this felt like a good move for Atlanta, just cutting their losses. DeJounte Murray's on a pretty good contract, honestly, and I think that made him more tradable. There's obviously a lot of rumors that Trae Young might get traded. That ultimately does not end up happening, at least at this point. But yeah, and I'll talk about how I feel about New Orleans' role in this when I get to them, but this could potentially be addition by subtraction for Atlanta, but overall I think Atlanta's ceiling, they're gonna be like a low seed playoff team. So like 6, 7, something like that, or a play-in team. Next we come to the Boston Celtics. Not really too exciting. Well, I guess, in one way it was a very exciting offseason for Boston, but they basically just re-signed the dudes they already had. They lost a couple tertiary players that aren't really going to make a big impact negatively. I feel like ultimately they should still be a top 3 team in the East. You could tell me they'll finish 1, 2, or 3, and I would accept that whole cloth. I could easily see them repeating, because they have their core pretty much locked up and all their depth pieces as well, so they did not really have to do much. Brooklyn gets involved in perhaps the trade trade of this offseason. They send Mikal Bridges to the New York Knicks for Bojan Bogdanovic, a 2025 first, a 2027 first, a 2029 first, and a 2031 first. Dude, the fact that they're trading picks in 2031, like, that doesn't feel real to me. I will be 37 years old when Brooklyn makes that pick. They also get a 2028 pick swap, a 2025 pick swap for the Bucks pick, and a 2025 second, which is just an absolutely amazing return for Mikal Bridges. once upon a time, honestly, not that long ago, Brooklyn was trying to be a competitor, but this allows them to kickstart a rebuild in all earnest. They also re-signed Nicholas Claxton and Trendon Watford. I don't really see any future where Brooklyn is not a bottom team in the East. They're going into full rebuild mode. The Charlotte Hornets, there's this very convoluted multi-team trade for Klay Thompson. As part of that, Josh Green gets sent to Charlotte. Josh Green, he just signed a 3-year extension. He's a pretty good 3-and-D wing player, shoots almost 40% from 3. I think it definitely helps Charlotte. In my opinion, their ceiling is like a play-in team right now. They're a team that just feels very dysfunctional across the board. Chicago, so this was one of the other big trades. Chicago trades Alex Caruso straight across to Oklahoma City for Josh Giddey. I think the initial reactions to this trade were very negative. Overall, I do feel like this isn't a fantastic trade if you're Chicago, especially because it's just a straight swap, and apparently last year there were teams offering 2 first-round picks for Caruso, which is better value than Josh Giddey. But Caruso is very unlikely to re-sign, so you risk losing him for nothing potentially, especially if he gets hurt. Giddey really struggled in the playoffs this year. He's part of the reason Oklahoma City lost. He was unplayable at times, but maybe a change of scenery, maybe being on a team where there's like fewer young draft picks all trying to be the face of the franchise. It could potentially be good for him, but I don't know. Chicago is a brutal market, and I think Chicago could be one of the worst teams in the entire league next year. Cleveland, all they really did was re-sign Donovan Mitchell, which I think there was a few question marks about whether or not Donovan Mitchell wanted to stay in Cleveland, but he does end up staying. I think they should be similar to where they were last season. I think in the Eastern Conference they'll be about a middle-of-the-pack playoff team. I don't expect them to be a true contender, but they will make the playoffs. Dallas gets Quentin Grimes from the Detroit Pistons for Tim Hardaway Jr., Toronto's second-round pick in 2025, their 2028 second-round pick, and the 2028 second-round pick from either the Clippers or the Hornets, whichever is better. I think this is a solid upgrade for Dallas. They also save some money. Tim Hardaway Jr. has kind of said openly on social media that he did not want to be on the team anymore. He's a bit of an older player, so getting rid of him for Grimes, he's a 3-and-D wing player, should be good, and he can get some minutes behind the other guy that Dallas traded for, who is Klay Thompson. They sent out, again, this was a convoluted multi-team trade, so Josh Green was part of that deal. He ends up going to Charlotte. They also send out a 2025 second-round pick and a 2031 second-round pick. Now, the big concern with Klay Thompson, obviously, is his health. He has missed a ton of time in the last few years and has looked, kind of like a shell of his former self when he was on the court in Golden State. Now with Dallas, you have Kyrie and Luka. Those are 2 really good ball handlers and playmakers. Klay Thompson should theoretically be finding himself open from deep quite a bit next year. said, they also have Quentin Grimes who can come in while Klay Thompson is sitting. I think Dallas should be about as good, if not a bit better, than last year. I don't know if I expect them to make the finals again, even if statistically they are a better team than last year, because a lot of that comes down to health and luck and things like that. But I think Dallas should be a top 4 team in the Western Conference. The Denver Nuggets, they signed Dario Saric, but they ended up losing Contavious Caldwell-Pope. Denver is weird. I feel like they should still be a good team. Of course, they have Jokic. They have a lot of good players on that team still. But I feel like overall they should probably be worse than they were last season. And last season they were worse than the year before, and it kind of feels like Denver is maybe regressing a little bit. I think that they should still be a top 4 team in the Western Conference, but I don't know if this is a finals team or even a Western Conference finals team anymore. And I think they need to figure something out to add in some high-end talent instead of just continuing to lose it. Because KCP was really big for Denver at a lot of times. The Detroit Pistons, they add Malik Beasley, and they get Tim Hardaway Jr. in the trade from Dallas. They signed Tobias Harris, and they re-signed Cade Cunningham. Perhaps the most important thing they did was fire Monty Williams. My biggest concern with Detroit is their lack of outside shooting. They didn't even improve that in the draft, really. I do feel like they should be better than they were last season, but that's not really saying much in my opinion. Golden State's like a sneaky good team next year potentially. They get Buddy Hield from the Sixers for a 2031 second round pick, which is an extremely cheap trade to get one of the best statistical pure shooters in the NBA. They signed Anthony Melton. They had Kyle Anderson as part of the Buddy Hield trade. I do feel like Golden State has gotten better. They have a lot of guys on that team that can shoot the ball well. I think they could be a low-seeded playoff team. Think like 6, 7, or 8. Or a play-in team. And I think those minutes where you have Steph Curry and Buddy Hield on the floor together are going to be very exciting. The Houston Rockets, pretty much, they just re-signed some of their players, but this is a team that's focusing on building up the young players they currently have on their roster. They're looking to improve the guys they already have and working towards the future. I think their ceiling is a play-in team. The Pacers, they re-signed Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin. I think that because of internal development, they will be better than last year. But I would have liked to have seen them maybe add a depth piece. But I think that they should be between a 4 and a 6 seed in the East. I just think the East, like so many teams are good in the East right now, especially after this offseason. There's kind of an arms race that just based on that, Indiana might move down a little bit. Now, one of the biggest net negative teams of this offseason, I don't want to use the term losers, but the Los Angeles Clippers, they lose Paul George, they lose Mason Plumlee, they lose Daniel Theis, they re-sign James Harden and Guy Jones, they signed Kevin Porter Jr., Derek Jones Jr., Nicholas Batum, Mo Bamba. They have their first season in their brand new arena next year, and I feel like this team is going to struggle. Kawhi Leonard cannot be relied upon anymore. Once upon a time, he was one of the best players in the league, but he was just dismissed from the Team USA practice camp. And it's like at this point, I feel like we're never gonna see a healthy Kawhi Leonard again, especially in the playoffs. And it sucks because this LA Clippers team at one point was like had one of the most exciting potentials in a team in the league, and nothing came of it. I think they could be a play-in team or a low-seeded playoff team next year, but it would not shock me if they missed the playoffs entirely. The Lakers. Now, it seemed like all offseason long, the Lakers were pushing for a trade. There was even rumors LeBron would take a discount if they could bring somebody in. There were rumors linking the Lakers to Klay Thompson, DeMar DeRozan, Paul George, and at one point Jeremy Grant. There's an idea they might trade 2 first-round picks for Jeremy Grant, but that never ends up happening. And I felt like the Lakers wanted to do more this offseason, but at the same time they didn't really want to give up future assets beyond, the next few years, because they know once LeBron leaves it might get ugly. So they re-signed LeBron James probably for a bit more than they should have. Max Christie as well. I feel like this could be a play-in team, but I don't think they'll be much better than that. The Memphis Grizzlies, they did not do much this offseason at all. I think they should be similar to where they were last season. Obviously, you'll see more of John Morant next year, which will improve them, but again, the West is pretty tough at the top, so I think they could be between like a 4 seed and a 7 seed. The Miami Heat, they re-signed Bam Adebayo. They re-signed one of my favorite players, Thomas Bryant. Don't know if I've told this story on this channel, but one time I was in Las Vegas, and I was at a buffet at like 1 or 2 in the morning. Most things were closed, so it was one of the only things open, so there was a bit of a line. And standing in front of me was Thomas Bryant, and he had 2 girls, one under each arm, and the only thing those girls were wearing were Thomas Bryant jerseys, and you could tell they were like his, because they were way too big for these girls. And ever since then, I have been a Thomas Bryant fan. This was back when he was in Washington, I think. They also re-signed Kevin Love. They lose Caleb Martin to Philadelphia in free agency. With Philadelphia, Jimmy Butler's getting a year older. I feel like they're going to take a step back next year. The thing with the Heat, it's like I keep kind of waiting for them to make like a swing for the fences move and cash in a bunch of their assets. But it just doesn't happen. Like, I know at one point they wanted to get Damian Lillard. Obviously he goes to Milwaukee instead. Let me look at their depth chart real quick. I'm not super familiar. Yeah, this, I think they could be, maybe a lower seeded playoff team. Think 6, 7, 8 potentially. The Milwaukee Bucks now, because the new CBA rules, obviously these teams that have a lot of high value contracts, it's a lot trickier for them to bring in new players because the new rules that are in place to promote parity and stop super teams and stuff. Milwaukee adds DeLon Wright and Dorian Prince-Fields for agency. I actually like bringing in DeLon Wright. He's a good defender, which is something this Milwaukee Bucks team needs, especially because they lost Patrick Beverley, along with losing Thanasis, Malik Beasley, Jay Crowder, Danilo Gallinari. Like, that's a lot of big names they lost. But ultimately, I think that the success of this Milwaukee Bucks team is going to depend solely on the health of the big three. If you have Dame, Giannis, and Chris Middleton all healthy in the playoffs, I think this Bucks team could go deep. I Boston or New York or even a healthy Philadelphia. So I don't expect them to get out of the Eastern Conference Final if they even get there. But I don't know if any of those guys can even stay healthy to the end of the playoffs anymore. Because last season they were all injured at various times. And they still have Brook Lopez, who I've had concerns about for like 2 years now. Milwaukee, I think they're going to be at second tier. I think this year in the East, Boston, the New York Knicks, and the Philadelphia 76ers are going to easily be the 3 best teams, and the 3 of those teams in some order will be the top 3 seeds in the East. I could see Milwaukee being 4, 5, or 6, potentially. Because I think the Orlando Magic are going to take a big leap next year. They could be the 4 seed or 5 seed, potentially. But we'll get to that in a second, obviously. Okay. Minnesota, they signed Joe Ingles. They re-signed some bench players. I think just based on internal development, they'll be as good as or better than last year. They should be a top 4 seed in the West. New Orleans, they add DeJounte Murray and Daniel Theus. So DeJounte Murray, they have an improvement at the point guard position. Hopefully you have fewer CJ McCollum point guard minutes now. There's some questions about Brandon Ingram's future. Apparently, like, he was nearly traded this offseason. I don't know how valid that is. But I think this could be a low-seeded playoff team again. Thanks, 6, 7, 8. The New York Knicks, they had Keita Bates, Diop, Mikal Bridges. They re-signed OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson. Like I said, this is going to be a top 3 seed in the East. They've immediately put themselves into contender status. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they add Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. They re-sign Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. I think that Caruso does make them better next year. They're already obviously really good last year. They're easily a top 3 seed in the West, probably even a top 2 seed in the West. I could see them in Minnesota being 1-2 potentially. I think this could be a Western Conference final or even a finals team. I think it depends on how these players mesh. How Alex Caruso and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander work together. Whether Caruso comes off the bench for them, if it's like a 1-2 type deal. And then the development of Chet Holmgren. But yeah, Oklahoma City should be, theoretically, they should have fewer holes next season, especially on defense. The Orlando Magic, their big hit is Contavious Caldwell-Pope. They re-sign Goga Bitadze, Gary Harris, Jonathan Isaac, as well as Franz Wagner and Mo Wagner. I really like the addition of KCP. Orlando was already a team on the up and up. They bring in a veteran presence who's a really good shooter, has a lot of playoff experience. I think they are a 4 to 6 seed in the East. The 76ers, perhaps the biggest offseason of any team. I kind of talked about this a couple weeks back. I said this is their offseason to push all their chips in. This is theoretically the end of the process. This is the time to win it all. They trade for Paul George. They bring in Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon. They get Caleb Martin, who I think could be a good impact player for them. They re-sign Kyle Lowry, Tyrese Maxey, and Kelly Oubre. Most notably, Tobias Harris is off the books. this feels like a boom or bust team based on the health of their players. If Embiid and Paul George can stay healthy through the playoffs, this team can go to the finals. If Paul George and Embiid are hurt and they miss more than 2 games in the playoffs, I think they get bounced in the Eastern Conference Finals or the second round. That's just my opinion. I know health has been an issue for this Philadelphia team. I am a huge Tyrese Maxey fan. I think he could even be better than Paul George on this team next year, bigger impact. Paul George might be the third option on this team, which is kind of scary to think about. But if this team stays healthy, I think they could go deep. I don't know, out of New York, Boston, and Philly, I think they're the weakest of the 3 when fully healthy. But that doesn't mean that they can't beat those other 2, right? Because the games still have to be played. Phoenix, they re-signed Bol, Damian Lee, Royce O'Neal. They add Mason Plumlee. I think this will be a really good regular season team. But I feel like unless there's some big adjustments made, they're going to struggle in the playoffs again like they did last year. There's just a lack of playmaking on this team. Too many players that need the ball in their hand to be successful, and too many ISO heavy players. But I think they'll be anywhere from 5 to 7. Because in my opinion, your top 4 seeds are going to be some combination of Oklahoma, Minnesota, Dallas, and Denver. I think those, in some order, are your top 4 seeds in the West. Sacramento, they add DeMar DeRozan and Jalen McDaniels. They re-sign Malik Monk. They lose Harrison Barnes. Overall, I feel like it's going to be a mid to low tier playoff team in the West. Not much to talk about. And funny enough, I skipped Portland on accident, my favorite team. We traded for Denny Avdia, which I was really excited about. Big Denny Avdia fan. I want us to draft him. So getting him now is really cool. We sent Malcolm Brogdon to Washington. I expect he won't last there all season, but people said the same about us. We're still going to be one of the worst teams in the league, and honestly, we're just hoping that we get the balls to go in our favor and we can get Cooper Flag. San Antonio, they signed Chris Paul. They trade for Harrison Barnes. I really like Chris Paul coming in. Him with Wembanyama is going to be a really good combo. He'll be able to teach up Stephon Castle a little bit. The Spurs, I think, should still be bad. I don't expect them to even make the play-in, but I think they'll be better than last year. Toronto trades for Davion Mitchell. They re-sign Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quigley. They lose Gary Trent Jr. I think they could be a play-in or low-tier playoff team at best, but there's an arms race going on in the Eastern Conference right now, and Toronto is not involved in it. Utah, they sign Davion Kinsey. They lose Chris Dunn and Taylor Horton Tucker. I said it feels like just yesterday they were a playoff team with hopes of a brighter future, but now it feels like they are going to be a bottom dweller next season, which is unfortunate. But hey, they're getting a new hockey team, so maybe all the sports fans in Utah will just start watching hockey instead. And finally, the Washington Wizards, they signed Sadiq Bey and Jonas Valanciunas. They re-sign Rajon Holmes. And I just said, they're gonna be bad. What do you want me to say? Anyways, guys, that was my little off-season recap for every single team. I think there's still maybe a few players floating out there that are gonna get deals at some point, but I don't know if it's really going to make much of a difference on what I said here. Let me know what you think of your team's performance in the offseason so far, or you think the biggest winners and losers of this offseason have been. I do hope you liked the video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this almost every single day. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.